Canada is among one of the most expensive places in the world to study, ranking 5th in the list of developed countries. The perception of students not paying their fair share is false. And in reality, students are paying more than ever for our education. Yet we are told time and time again by governments that education is an investment, and the grand rewards we receive after graduation justify the massive amounts of student debt that working class and low-income students are forced to take on. The undergraduate degree is the new high school diploma. People are learning that in order to be competitive in the workplace, a post-secondary education of any kind is necessary. With the rising cost of tuition, unfortunately, these dreams are becoming further out of reach for more and more people. Tuition has been increasing higher and higher through ancillary fees and hidden costs, but the take-home value of students' wage hasn't increased in the last 30 years. So at the same time as tuition has been increasing, the cost of living expenses has been going through the roof. This year, the national cumulative debt, this year, the national cumulative debt of public loan system has climbed to over $13 billion. These barriers to post-secondary study disenfranchise the most marginalized groups in society: race, age, size, ability, gender, sexuality, the list goes on and on. This is oppression against our own people and oppression by the state. Our Aboriginal communities have been even further attacked. The federal post-secondary student support program provides funding to Status First Nations so they may be able to attend post-secondary education, their treaty right. But this program, underfunded from the very beginning, has been capped at a maximum 2% annual increases. The funding hasn't kept up with the birth rate, the increasing cost of living, and hasn't even been kept up with the increasing rise of tuition. Only 15% of Aboriginal university students are receiving education or funding. The federal government isn't living up to their responsibilities, and as tuition increases for the first time in 10 years, the value of the PSSSP will go down. This will push more students out of classrooms and onto waiting lists, a number that is already in the tens of thousands. Universities and our government should be using the power that they have to increase this program and not to devalue it.
Yes, right on!
Right on. So, referring to women, women are only making 70 cents to every man's dollar when you account for full-time hours, only 64 cents for women working part-time. Women are having to work much harder to access the same opportunities provided to men privileged by their gender, race, and class. After tackling these societal barriers, women have to work even harder to access post-secondary education system. These inequalities leave women taking much longer to pay back their loans, leaving them paying more for the same education as men in the end. And still, tuition continues to rise. Students hear all too often that there isn't enough money to adequately fund post-secondary education. But if this were true, how does the federal government justify spending $18.9 billion on the military last year alone? I have no idea. With over $12 billion set for increases over the next 5 years. This is more than enough to eliminate the need for tuition fees 3 times over. 1 year of military spending could eliminate all student debt in Canada. So I guess the real question is not about funding, but one about priorities. Clearly, the federal government does not have their priorities in the right place. Students are facing even greater economic hardships today, and many of them are looking to the military as a viable option for post-secondary education. The position that is promoted as a casual job opportunity requiring every other weekend has a very real risk of combat activity. The contracts that applicants are forced to sign and with a supposed fixed end date can actually be extended without the consent of the person. The government tells students to invest in our education. Well, today I'm telling that government, supported by the tax dollars of you and me, that it is time they started investing in our post-secondary education system, not on illegal occupations and unjust wars. A high-quality, accessible education can only be achieved through adequate government funding. And I, for one, want my tax dollars to go through to education, not occupation. Our systems are underfunded and are increasingly being used as recruiting grounds. It's the militarization of post-secondary education in Canada. And this militarization is extending warlike attitudes to our culture. It's in the same realm of commercialization and public-private partnerships with a direct military involvement. It is unjust and it is oppression. The Department of Defense has the third largest research fund in the country, and through this financial support, the military is able to fund a significant portion of so-called academic research. Millions of dollars are being directed to military research where there are drastic cuts being made to research in the social sciences and humanities. Shame indeed. Military research is extending beyond the hard sciences to include social science research. However, this research is often being related to defense and national security. National security, where the findings are used to improve negotiating techniques, and I use the word technique loosely. Militarization is a threat against human rights and threatens the basis of academic freedom. Universities should be a place for exploration and intellectual development, not a place where the military exploits student labor and knowledge. Personally, I would like to one day live in a world that values people, respectful communication, self-determination, and real democracy. Not a world where our governments resort to violence and military action. This is the consequence of militarization and its implications on our culture as a whole. We see this in our children's video games, through the glamorization and sexualization of violence in the media, by the narrow definitions of masculinity, and the deplorable rate of violence in our society. Violence only accomplishes death, destruction, and the disempowerment of people. Violence perpetuates the destructive behavior as the preferred way of solving conflicts, which becomes increasingly more acceptable in our day-to-day lives. While violence is a strategy used to destroy, ideas are used to create. Ideas create possibility. They empower. Ideas create change. They transcend generations to take the present into the future. Using violence, even in order to solve oppression and exploitation of marginalized groups, will only act to reinforce the act of violence itself. Violence will not change the world. Ideas will. Education will. And it is what will change the world for the better. And it is our responsibility as students, as workers, as progressive people, to challenge the systems of oppression that perpetuate the cycle of violence through war and through occupation. Let our ideas inspire one another, and together we can change the world.